This is the Archtoolbox on Practice newsletter for February 19th, 2024. This is a newsletter that I send around every 2 weeks or so by email, and I'm just going to try to see if we want to do a podcast and do it on a video format. So this week's topic in the introduction is about artificial intelligence, and there's been a lot of movement recently over the past year. I've written about it in plenty of newsletters. But this week, OpenAI released a video creator called Sora, which is pretty amazing. And YouTuber MKBHD created a video. I'll just play a snip here without the sound. This is a video from about a year ago of Will Smith, and obviously it's very AI generated and looks very goofy. Proportions are weird, all that kind of stuff. But you'll quickly see here that he shows a new video. This was also a completely AI generated video of a guy sitting in a cloud and a woman walking in a city. When you look close, it isn't quite right, but it is significantly better than it was a year ago. And that's got me really thinking about AI and how that's going to affect us in the future. The next website that I just brought up is called Interior AI. This one probably a little bit more directly affects architects and interior designers. What you can do with this website is you can upload wireframes and have them converted into renderings. And you can sort of see here this one wireframe converted into a rendering, and you basically tell this what style you want. It'll take an empty room, it'll put furniture in it in whatever modern style you'd like to see, mid-century modern probably in this case. Tons of examples here. This is mostly marketed towards homeowners or real estate agents, but this definitely has a use for architects, interior designers, and this is the kind of thing that we'll be definitely seeing coming down the pipe. Now, obviously, every 100 years or so, there is a new technology that completely disrupts the workforce. It creates demand for other types of work, but it does, let's just say, it completely disrupts the way things are done. I think for architects and interior designers, that's going to be the case. I don't think architects are going to go away and be completely replaced by a computer. I think what it'll end up doing is make us more efficient. There's a lot of complaints in the industry about being overworked, long hours. AI can help replace some of those monotonous tasks and allow us to focus on the more creative side of the profession. On a more personal note, I've been recently thinking about how AI will affect Archtoolbox as a website. And I think the biggest concern I have is that Google already will just automatically give you many of the answers that people used to come to the website for. And in fact, I ran a little bit of an experiment with a new product called Gemini, so gemini.google.com. And I asked it, what's the R value of a 2x4 wall with mineral wool insulation in the cavity? And of course, since it's very smart, it came back and said, well, I can't give you that information. I need some more information in order to help do that. And it provided some of the components I needed to provide. So I went back and said, the studs are spaced 16 on center. It's rock wool insulation that fills the cavity. Assume a 1/2-inch drywall on the inside and 1/2-inch plywood on the outside with an air vapor barrier and cedar shingles. Gemini came back and recalculated, figured out the R value of all of the different components. It knows that you're supposed to add up the R values. Fortunately, it got a little bit confused. It thought when I said that the studs are 16 inches on center, that it meant a 16-inch cavity instead of the typical stud width, 3.5 inches. So it ended up giving me a 53.23 R value for that wall, which is, of course, way too high. but it had the logic there, and it had some of the information was correct. It just didn't quite understand what I was telling it to do. I did a couple of other searches for different things that you would look up on Archtoolbox. For instance, show me an example of book match veneer. It did find an example of that. Just rolling backwards, I was asking about ground pin, whether the ground pin on an electrical receptacle should be up or down. And it gave me a bunch of answers. Obviously, that's a question that doesn't have a correct answer, but it sort of knew that and gave those answers. And then when I said, well, where did you get that information? It gave me some of the locations. Thankfully, one of them was Archtoolbox. But as you can see, a lot of the general searches that Archtoolbox is getting traffic for now are going to go away. And I think the gist of this whole story is that all of us need to adapt if we want to continue being good architects, designers, and obviously I need to adapt for the website to be successful going forward. So moving on, generally I post 5 news articles every week, just interesting things relative to practice. I don't show you fancy new projects or that kind of thing. That stuff is all over the internet. Try to add some value with some different information. So on the AI front, the Associated Builders and Contractors group posted a new primer on artificial intelligence. This is specific to construction. However, I think it does have a lot of good information for architects and firm owners, just in terms of some of the definitions relative to AI. It's got some of the examples of different programs that currently exist for helping, in this case, pre-construction and construction. And it goes into a little bit of a conversation about how different offices should think about this and whether there needs to be some policies put in place, and draws a short conclusion. And I'm hopeful that the AIA comes up with something very similar in the near future, because I imagine most of the young people in your offices are already starting to dabble with this, and hopefully you are as well, even if it's as simple as the Gemini example that I showed earlier, starting to ask questions, starting to see how it can help you. Again, it's not going to replace you, but it'll be a virtual assistant. Moving on, the next item, again from ABC, indicating that construction prices are up 1% in January compared to the month prior. Good news on that is it's only up about 0.4% from 1 year ago. But there's still a little bit of something to watch out for, especially when the Federal Reserve indicated that they're not going to be raising or lowering interest rates in the next cycle. And so, as usual, we've been keeping an eye on this because it can affect whether your clients are going to move projects forward. Seeing some of those interest rates come down would be helpful, even though they continue to be at a level that's pretty standard over the long term. Back to AI, because I can't help myself. Architizer picked the best rendering tools, 7 of their top rendering tools. I have to say that some of these, like Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, and DALL-E, are not specific to architecture. They're very much just image generation tools. But these are the kinds of things that folks in your office will probably be experimenting with. And then some of these tools begin to look a little bit more like architectural tools. So it's definitely something to check out this article, see what these tools are able to do. I just wanted to show an example of something that I used recently for an article that I was working on for the website. We've got an article about a project kickoff meeting. It has a very stock photo of a planning process, And I kind of wanted something that wasn't a stock photo that was already copied all over the internet 1,000 times. So I actually asked DALL-E, one of the tools in that previous email that I was talking about. And I asked it to generate a pool planning session. And these are the two images that it generated. And these look pretty convincing on first glance, especially at the size that you're seeing them here. But just as an example, I want to blow them up a little bit so that you can look a little bit closer. And you'll notice that there's definitely some things that AI is not quite getting right. And the first glaring example is the background of this paper. The sticky notes are awesome. It doesn't really matter that you can't read the text on them. That's obviously intentional. It's not specific. But it's pretty unlikely that anybody's going to use that background for a pool planning session. So again, at thumbnail resolution, it looks pretty good, but it's not quite there yet. And then you start looking at a little bit closer at the hands. For instance, his hand in the lower right-hand corner. It's kind of got something weird going on in the thumb area there. This hand in the upper left has a kind of a strange fingernail that almost looks like it's a pen. And then, of course, if you look at the pens in any close detail, they're all a little bit off from what you'd expect. I'm not quite sure what's going on below that orange sticky note there. So again, this image is very convincing on first glance when it's down thumbnail size, but starts to look a little bit off when you start seeing it at full scale. And then again, this image also, I asked for a conference room set up for architects working on a pool planning session for a building, and I said put an architectural model in the middle of the table. And again, first glance looks pretty good, but then when you start getting into the details, you notice that an architecture firm would probably not have bar charts and these kinds of graphs for a pool planning scheduling session. And then obviously the people all look a little bit cartoonish. And when you start looking pretty close, this guy here looks very similar to this guy. These two guys have the same haircut. Not really sure what's going on with her leg and the table there, a little odd. And then, of course, this piece of paper looks like it got chewed up a little bit. Of course, an architect probably isn't going to be working in a conference room like this, but we'll cut them some slack thinking that maybe this is the client's conference room. Overlooking a river, but there is obviously some weird stuff going on even in that scene outdoors. But again, at a very small scale, it looks pretty good, and this is only going to improve over years. It's going to get infinitely better. It's the improvement is just amazing at this point. So definitely something to keep an eye on. Back to the emails. So another article that came up from Architizer is suggesting that all architects should do an adaptive reuse project at least once in their career. And I thought this was a pretty interesting article. You should check it out. There's a number of reasons. I'm not sure I'm convinced on all of the reasons specifically, but I do think that we're all going to be doing adaptive reuse projects in the future. Whether that's a downtown office building that becomes housing, or suburban offices that become medical office buildings, or even factories that become housing or offices, which clearly have been done in the past. This is only going to ramp up as we're focusing on sustainability and not generating all kinds of extra waste. And then the final article is just about learning about quality from other industries. I thought this was interesting. The title of the article is What Boeing's Quality Woes Can Teach Construction, and it's about quality control, quality assurance. You'll have to have either a free article left from ENR. As you can see here, I've used up my articles. But it is pretty interesting. I know that as architects, we don't want to get into the contractor's business and take on some of that risk. But it is pretty vital that we're paying attention and making sure that they're following the requirements that we set out in our specifications. So that's this week's newsletter. Thank you for listening. Let me know in the comments below what you think about seeing the newsletter in a video format, and maybe we'll continue to do this. Obviously, the link to this newsletter will be down in the description below so that you can click on that and check out any of these links. And of course, if you're interested, click on that link, and then up in the left-hand corner, you can click subscribe, or you can check out past issues. So again, thanks for listening, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.